Welcome to Everything's Not Black and White, a podcast about perspectives with your hosts, Lala and Brian. Hey, everybody, it's your girl, Lala.
And B-Dog.
Really?
Yeah. It's
No.
my new name today.
B Zizzle for shizzle?
B-Zizzle. Does it not fit?
No.
Ah, man.
Now, afraid not, kiddo.
All right, I'll go with Brian.
Hey, Brian, what's going on?
Yeah, the average white guy named Brian. Nothing fancy, nothing unusual.
That's okay. Brian's pretty special to me, I think.
No.
Oh, so nice.
Only because it's spelled with an I and not a Y.
The right way, right?
That's right.
Oh, my goodness. That's a topic for a whole nother discussion and another day. But we want to welcome everyone back to episode 2 of our podcast. If you are brand new and you're just listening to us for the first time, we say welcome and we appreciate you being here. And if you're coming back after the first episode, we say welcome back. We appreciate it and glad you guys are joining us today. We are on the topic of interracial marriage today.
Boom, ba-bum, bum.
And we realize that looks like a lot of different things, especially here in the United States. But for today's discussion, we're just going to be focusing on black and white interracial relationships, and particularly ours of a black female and a white male. So, Brian, I think for a few visitors to our podcast, they may not know a little history of interracial marriage in the United States, in particular for black and white people. Would you give them the little Cliff Notes or Cleophas Notes version?
Yeah. It's going to be short because there's over 300 years of history when it comes to interracial relationships.
Yeah.
So to start off with, the very first law ever was in Maryland, and it was a law in 1664 that basically said a black man cannot marry a white woman. And surprisingly, I didn't know this, but surprisingly, it was the white woman who was going to be sent to jail if that occurred.
Really?
Yeah. Interesting.
That's interesting.
So let me go fast forward. I'm going 200 years, 250 some years ahead here.
Yes.
All of a sudden, we find ourselves here in 1967. Why don't you tell us what happened in 1967?
Well, that was, if I am correct, and I know that I am, it was the case of Mildred and Richard Loving, who was a couple that lived in Virginia and were married, actually in Washington, D.C., where it was legal, and moved back to their home in Virginia, where it was illegal. And so they were actually arrested and harangued for many, many years for being an interracial couple. And the people, law enforcement in Virginia, didn't agree with their union. So they tried to separate them and break their family apart. And they ended up having to take it all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States to have it approved that they could be in love with each other, marry each other, and live happily ever after.
Yeah, and get this. In 1967, only 3% of all newlyweds were interracial couples.
Mm.
But since that time, since the Loving decision,
Yes.
including ourselves,
Yes.
we have gotten the percentage over 6 times the amount almost as it was in 1967. So it's at 17%.
Yeah.
Now there's interracial couples, ourselves included. So thanks to the Lovings,
Yes.
we have the opportunity ourselves to be married and be together in an interracial relationship. And we don't have to worry about the police busting down our doors unless there's something I don't know about.
Skeleton in your closet. I'm going to say about that. No, we're good. No,
Okay.
We're totally good. We should be fine. What I think is really interesting, though, that Virginia, their slogan for their tourism is Virginia is for lovers.
Well, it says lovers, not lovings.
That is
So,
also true.
So
Yes.
The times are changing.
Yeah,
though.
times are changing, and it's fascinating. But in my personal life, interracial marriage had been going on for a really long time. My uncle, Henry, who was in the military, he's in the Air Force, his wife was a British woman and still is a British woman named Anne. They've been married well over 50 years at this point, because I'm almost 47, and so they were married before I was even born. So they've had quite a long history, but I think it might have been different maybe because she was European, and he was in the military at the time. So I'm not sure if that made a difference or not, but I know they've had quite a long marriage.
Yeah. And the only diversity I had in my family was which shade of white were we? We're either white or really white. So there was no in between. I had no understanding of what an interracial relationship was like. I just never experienced it until later in life.
Yeah. So I think I would love to hear your perspective, and I think our listeners would too, is what was your thought, first of all, about getting involved with an interracial relationship, particularly with a Black woman, and like what changed your mind in that process?
I remember when you first started flirting with me, I was like, is this Black woman flirting with me? Because if you know me, I'm a blue jeans, I wear flannel shirts, a lot like Mr. Loving.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think I was some hillbilly, some hayseed that fell off the wagon, and here's this beautiful Black woman flirting with me, and I was kind of caught off guard because I've never had anybody of a different ethnicity flirt with me, so that was kind of eye opening, but it was enjoyable. Don't get me wrong. But
I mean, what's not to enjoy with my affections? I mean, really.
I know. But over time, it took me a while to get there. But then I finally asked you out, and then I still had like concerns, and like I was actually like Googling stuff like, what's it like to be in an interracial relationship? I'm like, it's not that complicated.
Yeah.
But I made it complicated because I didn't have any experience in it. And I remember this one time when I was going to ask you about getting married, and I remember I asked this friend of mine named Marquita, and her husband was white. And with Marquita, I said, Marquita, like, what's the secret? Is something going to happen? Is there something I should know? Like when you marry into an interracial
Genie in the
relationship?
bottle, the genie just comes out and all your wishes come true. That's what happens.
I can't imagine being in her shoes. Like, what a silly question that was. But to say that and hear myself say that looking back, that was definitely kind of awkward. But she answered me and gave me an honest answer, and she just kind of paused and looked at me and said, Brian, you can't help who you love. And just left it at that. And it kind of, surprisingly, it gave me comfort in the decision I was making. And ultimately, you ended up winning the lotto because I did ask you to marry me.
That's right. I did. I hit that Mega Millions for sure in case of husbands, you know. So I think what was so cool about you is that, and I told you this, what attracted me to you was just your sense of humor. You were such a kind, respectful person. You always made me laugh, which I thought was really cool. And then the fact that you cared so much about being a father. And that was really interesting to me because my own father was not in my life. So to have someone who was very dedicated and concerned about not only his own child, but how he can be a father figure to those in the community was very special to me. So, you know, I think at that point, it was irrelevant that you were white. It was just like you were just this cool guy, and I just appreciated who you were.
But you also, I appreciate that, but you also had dated white people before me.
Yes.
So what was that experience? Like, what was the first time when you went out, or what was the first time it was like when you brought a boy home that was white, being that you were raised by your grandmother, who obviously went through different time than what we have?
Yeah. Well, the interesting part is I went to college in Washington State, and this was in the early 90s, mid 90s, and it was 1% black in the state. So that was one thing. So you only had a certain pool of people that were even there. And then my college was also 1% black. So about 7,500 people were in my college. So that means about 75 people were black on campus. So you had very limiting experiences with people of color anyway. And then with black people in particular, most of the guys were on the football team or the basketball team, as you could imagine. So it was a handful of us girls who were there. So we had to make choices. If we wanted to date someone, they probably were going to be outside of our race. So it just became something that was, you know, about access, really, not necessarily preference. You know, I think men of all races are beautiful and can be kind and wonderful. Just so happened that I found one that was Caucasian. So that was cool. But my very first boyfriend that I brought home to my grandmother, she worked really hard to be as politically correct as possible. I mean, she wasn't a racist by no means, or she wasn't prejudiced against white people despite all the hardships she had growing up. But what she was, she just wanted somebody to treat me well, and somebody that would love me and treat me for the kind of person that she always thought me to be. And I was special. So it wasn't a weird situation for my grandmother, but it was kind of weird actually for some of my other relatives. I actually had an uncle who gave me a T-shirt that had a woman looking into the refrigerator with rollers in her hair, and she was kind of stubby. And he said, it said on this T-shirt, "Looking for love in all the wrong places." And he basically said when he gave me that T-shirt that he'd rather I be fat and addicted to food than to be married to a white person. So,
ouch.
Yeah.
That's not very sensitive.
Unfortunately, yeah. There's still family members that feel that way. The majority of my family, however, does not. And that's an uncle I actually don't see very often. But I think most people who know me know my heart, and they know that I care about people and the human aspect of people, and that I really just want to be in a relationship where we are partners, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And with my family as well, there was some like, "Are you dating a black person?" Like, "Yep, I am." And once people got to meet you, and I think that's what people need to do with anybody, is just have a conversation, talk, and get to know somebody before you make a judgment. Because if you just look, don't read a book by its cover, actually get in and see what's going on. And when that happened, everybody grew to love you and appreciate you. And right now, you're everybody in my family thinks you're great, and you're great for me.
Yeah. So I think what a lot of people might be fearful of when you start talking about interracial relationship is basically how they'll be treated as a couple, not even necessarily with other family members, but that could be the case. But even when you go out in public, do you remember one of the first times when we went out and how we got some looks and stares and maybe even some comments that were not very flattering about our relationship?
Help refresh my memory. I'm trying to think of, there were incidences, but I'm trying to think of the one you're talking about.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter what I'm thinking about. I mean, there were just incidences that I think maybe at the beginning you were not necessarily keen on seeing, but then you started to see them after a while.
Yeah, there was one incident in my memory that really was kind of shocking. For those of you who don't know, I've been receiving cancer treatment over the last 4 years. And one thing I was doing was going into chemotherapy sessions where I would sit in a room and wait for my turn to be called back to get my chemotherapy. And I remember distinctly this older white gentleman. He's probably 70, 80 years old. And he was asleep across from us. Didn't think much about it. But when he woke up, he looked at you and I, and then he double looked at us. And then he got up out of his seat and went and sat on the other side of the room. And I remember being like, wow, how petty is that? Yeah. You're sitting in an office where everybody here is getting chemo, which means somebody you care about or yourself has cancer. But it was so appalling to see you and I sitting next to each other that he had to go to the other side of the room.
Yeah, I mean, it was sad, and there's been several of those kind of situations, and I think the deeper meaning of all of that is that cancer doesn't discriminate against black and white people. Everyone gets cancer. Anyone can get a awful chronic illness, and they don't discriminate against color. So I don't know why, as human beings, we tend to do that. And so that was unfortunate for him, but it's probably a product of how he was raised. And, and I think that's a bigger conversation for us, even to have right now, that we understand not everyone's going to feel the same way we do about being in an interracial relationship. I know a lot of people have said, what about the kids? And the kids won't be accepted on either side, and the kids won't know how to have an identity. What do you say to people like that?
You just raising your kids with love. It doesn't matter. And even with that gentleman, we've had, why wouldn't you get mad? Well, I'm not going to get mad. First of all, I'm not going to waste my time on getting mad with that gentleman. But more importantly, we have the awareness to know that he grew up in a different time and era than we did. Mm-hmm. And we know some of the ideology that was taught back in the 50s and 60s and even 40s for this guy. I mean, he was an older guy. So we understand some of the challenges that he faced, and we always talk about you are kind of what you marinate in. Mm-hmm. And if he was marinated in that with his parents or his uncles or his family or school or whatever it is, I'm not going to be mad. I'm not going to waste any time on being upset with that gentleman. That's his choice. But with our kids, it's all about just raising them with love,
Right.
and just supporting them no matter what the cause is. I got your back.
Yep, absolutely. And I think one of the bigger topics you just said is like, how do you spend time with people that are different from you to get to know them? You know, we have a lot of friends, couples that are all races, all orientations, all nationalities and backgrounds, and we find commonality just in the idea of being in a relationship or being married or over food or whatever it is. You pick something that you have in common and you explore it, and then you find out how many other things you have in common, and it really builds out the relationship. And so I think that's what people need to look at, is instead of trying to see all the differences all the time, find out what you have in common and use that as a jump off point.
One of the greatest lessons I learned, and I don't even know if the gentleman meant to teach it, but do you remember Kelly's grandpa?
Yeah.
How old was he at the time?
Oh my gosh, he was late 90s.
So this gentleman grew up prime Jim Crow era laws, had every reason to be mad at white people, and he didn't hold a grudge. When I walked in and I met this gentleman for the first time, even though he was elderly and he had trouble standing and walking, he got up out of his seat to shake my hand, and I thought, what a kind gesture for all he's been through, that he can still feel like he needs to stand up and shake my hand just to show his kindness. And when you have people like that taking steps like that, and kind of like, I don't say letting go of the past, but knowing it is the past and moving forward. And that was a really touching moment for me, and I still remember that. And I remember that gentleman. Unfortunately, he has passed on since. Rest his soul. But what a kind gesture.
Yep. And I think we always have to just take a step out of ourselves, and we make the first move. I think it's so hard and taxing on your body to live with hate and have venom against people. It's so just exhausting that you want to connect with people who want to move forward, and you will connect with people who want to make the world a better place. And I still believe love will conquer hate every day. Every single day, I believe that. So I think the more we explore and expound on our love for each other and our love for our community, I think we can definitely make the world a better place.
Now, back onto the marriage topic, I know you have friends that will still only date within their race.
Yes.
How does that make you feel, and what opportunities do you feel like they may be gaining or missing from that?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of, particularly Black women that I'm connected to and close with, that have never dated outside of their race. And some of them are of age in their late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s. And they are waiting on that, what they call IBM, ideal Black male. And he hasn't shown up yet for them. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be married or together with a Black man if you are a Black woman. But I also think I don't want these women to be lonely the rest of their lives waiting for a relationship that may or may not come, when there are really great men out there that can still treat them well and understand what they're going through in life and how to support them, regardless of whether or not they're Black. A lot of the things that the women say to me that I hear is that, if you're a white man, you can't understand my struggle. I think they believe because, you haven't gone through the kind of racial injustice or discrimination in the workplace that people of color might have gone through, that you can't understand that journey. And so they're limiting themselves to be in a relationship, maybe out of fear of what the community around them might say, or just maybe out of a fear of that they don't have enough in common to keep the relationship strong.
And I can say for myself, when we first got together, I didn't have an awareness of some of the challenges that you went through, but I will let the ladies out there know that I have learned over time to better understand some of the inequalities and some of the missed opportunities and some of the challenges you face as a Black woman in today's society. And it doesn't go by the wayside. I take that in. I understand that. And you can ask Lala over here. I actually do research. When I don't understand something, I get on Google and I'm like, try to do research, help myself to better understand that. At the end of the day, I still might not agree that it's an issue, but at the end of the day, I can have a better understanding of why she thinks it's an issue, or somebody else might think it's an issue. But that's what we do through conversation.
Yeah, we do a lot through conversation. I think one of the other big challenges we have is deciding which pie is better, sweet potato or pumpkin. And it's a struggle with our family around the holidays because, I can dig pumpkin rolls up here, pumpkin pancakes even, pumpkin bread, but nothing beats a good sweet potato pie. I'm sorry.
Is that where you're going?
That's where I'm going.
Are you hungry?
No, I'm not hungry at the moment, but I never will turn down a piece of pie.
That reminds me of the first time I had dinner with you, your mom, your sister, and ironically, your dad was there. It's the only time I've ever met him.
It's the only time you've ever met him, for real.
But I remember going there, and I was like, well, what are you having? And, well, traditional soul food, stuff like that. I'm like, what is, I didn't know. I don't eat soul. I didn't know what it was.
Collard greens.
Yeah. What else do you
have? Black eyed peas.
Yep. Yeah, ribs.
Red ribs. Mac and cheese, of course.
Yeah. Southern mac and cheese. So somehow they're special.
I mean, there's some specialness in our Southern mac and cheese, no lie.
But when I sat down, I was nervous because when we first met, I remember I was nervous because all your family was there. I felt like everybody's kind of, what's this guy doing? I'm the only white guy in the room. How's this going to go? And I remember just sitting down, and that's one thing about food, man. If it's good, it'll bring people together.
That's right.
And your mom did a wonderful job at preparing that food that day.
Yes.
And I still think about it even now.
Yeah, and I think that's such a wonderful common thread for people. If you can't agree about a lot of things, you can sit down and have a meal together, and usually that conversation can come very naturally from that environment. Just thinking about tradition in your own family, some of your favorite foods, places that you've never been that you maybe want to go and try some of their culinary delights. So things of that nature are pretty fun too.
Yeah, I agree. And now we go to soul food restaurants and whatnot. Yes. And I'm excited. Like, I know what's on the menu. Let's go.
Yes, exactly. And even not just soul food. We experience all cultural food together, which is super exciting and wonderful as a family. So I do want to talk about one other piece that I think is really important from an interracial couple relationship. And some of that is spirituality and religion. I grew up in a Southern Baptist environment, and I went to church quite often. And Brian, you didn't go to church as often.
Yeah, and we went to just a traditional Christian church.
Yes.
I think it was non-denominational, but don't hold me to that. That's how often we went.
Yes.
I'm not really sure.
But typically people say that's the most segregated time in America is during church. So it's kind of nice when you can kind of visit churches that accept all couples together. But when we first got married, we actually went to one of my friend's church, which happened to be a traditional Black church on Easter. And so I remember one of the funny moments is that I told my husband we were going to church and we were going to go grab lunch afterwards. And he said, oh, do I need to eat anything before? And I was like, oh, no, shouldn't be that long, And our favorite comedian, Gary Owen, does a phenomenal joke because Gary is a white man married to a Black woman. And he does a great joke about his first time visiting a Black church. And I think Brian's experience was very similar, was it not?
Yes. And if you're Black in the audience listening to this, you already know what's going on. But for those of you that are white that don't know, Black services on Easter, oh my Lord, he kept asking for people to come up and be saved, and I was about to throw people out of the seat, like, get your butt up there and get saved. We've been here 3 hours. I mean, we were sitting there so long we had to knock the dust off.
So I got in trouble for not letting him eat a little something before we went to church. But that was another one of those cultural experiences that you have to experience at least one time when you're in an interracial relationship. But
I will say, though, I enjoyed the service. Despite the time it took, the choir was wonderful. The preacher was great. Lord, the time management. What happened?
It's Easter, man. You gotta celebrate. You gotta celebrate. But we've this year will be our 12th year together, our 11th year in marriage, and we have continued to learn each and every day. We continue to learn more about each other because we're in a different stage of life. When we when we first met, even, 12 years ago. We have children that are grown now. I mean, it's like we're watching them develop and become amazing humans and citizens of the world. And so we will continue to learn and grow together. And my hope, my sincere hope, is that more people will take the time to reach out to someone who is different from them, who have a different marriage than them, different ethnicity than them, and start to try to bridge the divide that's happening. And just ask people a question. Find out what they have in common. We all get sad. We all love. We all get angry. We all find joy. So why don't we just take a moment to just really talk to each other and explore what it is that gives each other those different emotions and figure out what we have in common.
Yeah, a little bit of conversation go a long way.
Yes.
It can definitely solve some problems, especially communication problems, and that's why we're here doing this podcast today.
That's why we're here today. So thank you all again for joining us today. In a couple weeks, we'll have our next episode, and we're very excited to continue to explore this dialogue around the differences and how we can come together. And remember, everything's not black and white.
Well, you got ahead of yourself.
What?
You forgot to give the email out.
Oh, I did. I got ahead of myself.
So, La, if anybody wants to reach us via email, where would they go?
They can go to enbwpodcast@gmail.com. That is enbwpodcast@gmail.com.
And if you have any questions, topics, statements, if you want to yell at us, give us some love, send it that way.
No yelling, just give us love. No, we'd love to hear your experience. We know there's a lot of interracial couples out there, and your experiences may be similar to ours or different from ours, and we'd love to hear from you so that we can share in that knowledge and experience together.
All righty. Until next time, this is Brian.
And Lala.
We will see you next time.
All right. Have a good day. This has been Everything's Not Black and White, a podcast about perspectives with your hosts, Lala and Brian, a production of LBB Edutainment.